Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Rooker, and I am Associate Vice President for Diversity, Community Affairs, and Equity at Teachers College. I want to welcome you to Teachers College and our Constitution Day program, Honoring Good Trouble, Ending Voter Suppression. Each year, to commemorate the signing of the U.S. Constitution on September 17, 1787, Teachers College hosts an educational program about the U.S. Constitution. This year, in conjunction with our Democracy and Education series, we are hosting this panel to discuss the right to vote, efforts past and present to suppress this fundamental right, and what we can do to end this injustice. As noted in President Bailey's email to the community yesterday, this program is the kickoff for the college's broader voting initiative, TC Votes. Over the next few weeks leading up to the election, you will have access to an array of nonpartisan educational resources related to the election. Today, our illustrious panelists include Julie Ebenstein, Senior Staff Attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union, and Ricardo Ramirez, Voting Rights Advisor at the Brennan Center for Justice. TC's own Dr. Sonya Douglas Horsford, Associate Professor of Education Leadership and founding director of the Black Education Research Collective, will guide us in this discussion. If you have questions for our panelists or moderator, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit them. While we have limited time, we hope to get to as many questions as possible. I'll now turn to Janice Robinson, our Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs.
And thank you all for joining us in acknowledging U.S. Constitution Day and honoring the late, great Congressman John Lewis. This has been an extraordinary year for the entire world. And as we cope through the pandemic, I can't help but feel a tremendous sense of possibility and hope still for the future of our country and the world. During these times, we have seen a remarkable sense of innovation, adaptability, more open dialogue. Together, we are slowly adjusting to this temporary new space of virtual life. At the same time, though, this pandemic has further highlighted existing inequalities that plague our institutions and disproportionately affect historically marginalized communities. Racial and social injustice continues to be at the forefront of our nation. And today we want to talk about the ballot box. The election day is 45 days away, and nationwide there are questions regarding how people will be allowed to vote, concerns whether their votes will be counted, possible staffing shortages at polling centers. These all represent some of the many, many voter suppression tactics. Congressman Lewis dedicated his life to the advancement of civil rights, including ensuring that we as a people can exercise our fundamental right to vote. He did this through his historic actions as he marched on Bloody Sunday across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and he never stopped marching. I cannot think of a better way to honor Congressman Lewis than our continuing to work together towards ending voter suppression and remaining true racial and social justice warriors. Before we continue this afternoon's program, I would like to share a video clip of Congressman Lewis's final words and his aspirations for the next generation of change makers. The video will play just about 5 minutes and 23 seconds.
While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know that in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference in our society. Millions of people motivated simply by human compassion laid down the burdens of division. Around the country and the world, you set aside race, class, age, language, and nationality to demand respect for human dignity. That is why I had to visit Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington, though I was admitted to the hospital the following day. I just had to see and feel it for myself, that after many years of silent witness, the truth is still marching on. Emmett Till was my George Floyd. He was my Rayshard Brooks, Sandra Bland, and Breonna Taylor. He was 14 when he was killed, and I was only 15 years old at the time. I will never, ever forget the moment when it became so clear that he could easily have been me. In those days, fear constrained us like an imaginary prison, and troubling thoughts of potential brutality committed for no understandable reason were the bars. Though I was surrounded by two loving parents, plenty of brothers, sisters, and cousins, their love could not protect me from the unholy oppression waiting just outside that family circle. Unchecked, unrestrained violence and government-sanctioned terror had the power to turn a simple stroll to the store for some Skittles or an innocent morning jog down a lonesome country road into a nightmare. If we are to survive as one unified nation, we must discover what so readily takes root in our hearts that could rob Mother Emanuel Church in South Carolina of her brightest and best, shoot unwitting concert goers in Las Vegas, and choke to death the hopes and dreams of a gifted violinist like Elijah McClain. Like so many young people today, I was searching for a way out, or some might say a way in. And then I heard the voice of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on an old radio. He was talking about the philosophy and discipline of nonviolence. He said we're all complicit when we tolerate injustice. He said it is not enough to say it will get better by and by. He said each of us has a moral obligation to stand up, and speak out. When you see something that is not right, you must say something. You must do something. Democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participating in the democratic process are key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. You must also study and learn the lessons of history because humanity has been involved in this soul-wrenching existential struggle for a very long time. People on every continent have stood in your shoes through decades and centuries before you. The truth does not change. And that is why the answers worked out long ago can help you find solutions to the challenges of our time. Continue to build union between movements stretching across the globe because we must put away our willingness to profit from the exploitation of others. Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide.
We are blessed to have had John Lewis with us in our lives and in our country. It wasn't long enough. So let me turn and at this moment, and I would like to invite Professor Sonya Douglas Horsford to join us to introduce our panelists and moderate this afternoon's discussion. Dr. Sonya Horsford is Associate Professor of Education Leadership in the Department of Organization and Leadership at Teachers College, Columbia University, where her research focuses on the politics of race, education policy, and urban school leadership in the post-civil rights era. She is a senior research associate at the Institute for Urban and Minority Education, UME, and founding director of the Black Education Research Collective. Professor Horsford has edited 3 books and authored 2, including Learning in a Burning House, Educational Inequality, Ideology, and Disintegration, published by Teachers College Press, and The Politics of Education Policy in an Era of Inequality, Possibilities for Democratic Schooling, with Janelle Scott and Gary Anderson, published by Rutledge. I just want to say a really great and wonderful, huge thank you to Dr. Horsford. She's a wonderful colleague and a real leader, and we're just thrilled that she's taken the time to be here with us for this important and timely discussion. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, Janice, and welcome to everyone joining us for Constitution Day at Teachers College. I am Sonya Horsford, and I'm very excited about the discussion that we will be having tonight with 2 individuals who are no strangers to getting into the good trouble that our beloved Congressman John Lewis called each of us to do, to advance civil rights and justice in our society. And so we will get right into it. I want to start by introducing Julie Ebenstein. Julie is a senior staff attorney with the ACLU Voting Rights Project. Since 2013, Julie has litigated voting rights matters across the country, including challenges to felony disenfranchisement in Florida and Iowa, discriminatory voter suppression laws in North Carolina, at-large school board elections in Ferguson, Missouri, dual voter registration systems in Kansas, and election officials' rejection of absentee ballots based on voter signatures in California and New Hampshire. And leading up to the 2012 general election, Julie was a staff attorney with the ACLU of Florida and counsel in several voting rights cases. Julie has written and testified on the detrimental effect of criminal disenfranchisement laws and the intersection of overcriminalization, prison gerrymandering, and voting rights dilution. She's also a graduate of Columbia University and Fordham University School of Law. And so at this time, we ask that you welcome Julie Ebenstein to give opening remarks.
Thank you so much for having me on today. Thank you to all of the participants, both for joining us today. And if you're joining for Constitutional Day, I can only assume that I should also thank you for all you do to register fellow voters and spread the word about both voter suppression and what people need to do to get registered and to vote. I want to talk briefly about the work that the ACLU does to protect voting rights. Starting with what the foundations of the right to vote really are. What are the most basic elements of what we as eligible voters want in an election? And to make that very simple, people should be able to register, vote, and have their vote counted. It'll get more complicated in a moment, but at base, people need to be able to register without unnecessary requirements like documentary proof of citizenship. They need to be able to maintain their registration without being unlawfully purged from the rolls. And they need accurate information, especially for first-time voters, on how to get registered. Once they're registered, they need access either to the polling place or to voting by mail or another means of casting their ballot. And once their ballot is cast, assuming that they're eligible, it should be counted on an equal basis to all other ballots. That is the baseline goal of fighting against voter suppression, to do away with the barriers that prevent eligible voters from voting and to make sure that there are no disparate effects of unnecessary burdens on the right to vote. So why is that a problem and what do we do to address it? First of all, I think it's helpful to keep in mind that legislators, state legislators for the most part, have a self-interest in maintaining the voting population that elected them. So when we see voter suppression laws passed, oftentimes I view it in terms of the legislators who passed those laws, who were elected by folks already voting, a predictable group of voters, and may have an incentive in some instances to keep out new eligible voters. And that can mean first-time voters, young people. That can mean people with a prior conviction who have lost their right to vote but should be welcomed back into the electorate. When you look at what self-interested legislators do, there are cycles of voter suppression. A lot of the time they're justified based on the boogeyman of fraud that has been raised for decades now, and most recently by high-level elected officials. And what legislators fail to do when they invoke the dangers of voting is to mention the dangers of having a low turnout and low registration rate in the US. So instead of thinking in terms of how do we protect against dangers that aren't even there, I think the goal should be increasing registration and increasing turnout for eligible voters so that we have a robust democracy. Okay, how do we do that as far as the legal protections go? Elections are a shared federal and state power, and there are a number of provisions under federal law that attorneys can use to protect the right to vote from infringement by the states. One, the constitutional provisions protect, again, I won't go into the legal details, but protect against racial discrimination, both in the 14th and 15th Amendment and in the Voting Rights Act. Protect against unnecessary burdens on the right to vote in the 14th Amendment. The National Voter Registration Act makes sure that there's robust registration and turnout and that people have access to those things. And these are the tools that we really use as litigators in the voting rights space to make sure that unconstitutional laws are beaten back when they're passed and that individual voters and individual states have the rights protected. If you look at the history, and I certainly can't do this justice after hearing from Congressman Lewis, but if you look at the history of voter suppression, there are a series of barriers that states have put up to prevent people from voting. And in many cases, historically, to prevent African-American voters from voting. First generation barriers like poll taxes or grandfather clauses were the most straightforward, but second generation barriers, putting burdens in people's ways that they cannot cast their ballot, is still something that we fight against today. Thinking about recent issues that have come up, we've seen in the last couple of years an attempt to tinker with the census, a really integral part of redistricting and other access to services that can last for 10 years. My organization was participated in a lawsuit just this past year that challenged the attempt to put a citizenship question on the census survey, even though there was evidence that that would decrease the response rate and lead to inaccurate results. We were successful in getting that removed at the Supreme Court, and even more recently, there was what we call Census 2.0, attempting to take the full census and then remove undocumented people from the census count. Now, the census is meant to be an entire head count of everybody present within the US. And we were able to enjoin that attempt to tinker with redistricting and other access to services as well. Another issue that we've seen come up in voter suppression, and this is something that's occurred for over 100 years, is felony disenfranchisement. Along with the Brennan Center and other partners, I'm litigating a case in Florida where Florida passed a system where people need to pay to get their rights to vote back after they have a felony conviction and have lost their right to vote. It's sort of unbelievable that we're still seeing provisions like that discriminate on the basis of wealth, that require payment and a poll tax for people to access the right to vote, and that can't even be administered by the state that passed it. So those are just some of the examples of what we're able to address through the courts. To talk about more current times, you know, even laws that usually would lead to proper administration of elections can be suppressive in certain contexts. You see us all sitting here at home. Obviously, many people have stayed at home and are kept out of their offices, and I assume this community has been deeply affected by the pandemic. If you think about the upcoming election and election administration in the context of the pandemic, restrictions that otherwise wouldn't be problematic have become problematic, and we filed over a dozen cases to challenge interference with the right to vote in the time of the pandemic. Our goals as far as addressing pandemic voting are to make sure that everybody has access to voting by mail, that needs access to it so they don't endanger themselves, that there are no restrictions on voting by mail that would put people in jeopardy, for example, requiring that they come into close contact with witnesses or with notaries in order to cast their ballot. And of course, making sure that their ballot is counted on the back end once it's received, even if there is a slowdown in the mail or there are other means for casting it. Those are just some of the ways, as an example, that states or the federal government can intentionally or inadvertently interfere with and unconstitutionally burden the right to vote. I know I don't have much time, but I will look forward to answering any questions that people have about the ACLU's work on voting rights or questions about the upcoming election. Again, thank you all for everything that you do, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Julie, for that really wonderful and helpful overview of voter suppression. And we look forward to being able to dialogue with you a bit more as part of this discussion. Up next, I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Ricardo Ramirez is an advisor in the Brennan Center for Justice's Voting Rights and Elections Program and founder and principal of Forward Shift Strategies, which is a communications consulting firm where he brings his high-level experience in communications and messaging strategies for electoral campaigns, democracy, and social justice efforts. Before launching Forward Shift Strategies, Ricardo directed the democracy program at Rethink Media, a nonprofit supporting social justice organizations across the country with communication strategies and capacity building. He was also a senior member of the communications team at the Advancement Project's national office, where he worked with organizations at the forefront of grassroots racial justice fights, focusing on voting rights, immigrant justice, and rights restoration. Please welcome Ricardo Ramirez.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas Horsford. It's an incredible honor to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you for this important discussion. Thank you to Columbia University for this work honoring the legacy of Congressman Lewis and for convening us for this important conversation. My name is Ricardo Ramirez. I use he, him pronouns, and I, like Dr. Douglas Horsford said, I am an advisor on voting rights to the Brennan Center for Justice. I get to work with an incredible team of advocates and litigators, some of whom have been active in court these last few months, in part with Julie and her team at the ACLU. And they're waging a fierce fight for the right to vote in courtrooms across the country. I come to the Brennan Center not as a lawyer, but rather with a background in advocacy and political campaigns, and that includes a lot of work in voting rights and communications and strategy work. So at the Brennan Center, along with my team, I help position grassroots organizations in the forefront of different social justice fights to advocate for their own rights and win their fights. I'm going to discuss some of the voting landscape as it relates to our work and our research, and then I'll share a couple of recommendations from the Brennan Center for states across the country. If we start from the most basic voting experience that a voter can have in America today, going to cast their ballot at a polling place, we already see severe and disparate problems from this year's primaries. We saw voters from Georgia to Wisconsin to Kentucky waiting in extremely long lines to vote, especially Black voters. Again, they waited long hours during the day into the night in the thick of a pandemic, all just to get a chance to vote. What's happening in these states is shameful, but it is not any problem. A recent Brennan Center report dug deep into new data showing in detail how voters all across the country, especially young people, low-income communities, and people of color are carrying a costly, disproportionate burden when it comes to these changes. Latino and Black voters were more likely than white voters to report particularly long wait times, and they waited longer generally. That was one of the main findings of our research. which is not terribly surprising, but it's important to put numbers behind it. Another finding that caught our eye is the alarming correlation between demographic and economic change over the past decade and electoral resources in polling places in 2018. Counties where the white share of the population shrank over the last 10 years had fewer resources per voter relative to other counties. And counties where incomes declined or grew slowly had fewer resources per voter than those where incomes grew quickly. So to put it plainly, counties that became less white or where incomes declined had fewer poll workers per voter and more voters per polling place. There are some more details on that broader trend, and all this information along with other bodies of research are available on our homepage, brennancenter.org. So when we add to this backdrop the reality of the pandemic, along with what an administration that discredits or tries to discredit our institutions, tries to instill fear and misdirect the public, we know that we have our work cut out for us. With ongoing COVID-19 spikes happening in different regions of the country, in college campuses, we know that preparing election systems for voting during a pandemic has been an urgent effort from the advocacy community. I know that we've been active on this along with really incredibly strong partners in the voting rights community. We've been working to expand voter registration opportunities. That's one crucial component of how we improve elections going into November amid a pandemic. At this time in other presidential election years, we would be seeing an increase in voter registration rates. But with the pandemic, some states are reporting declining registration numbers. So we've been pushing states that don't have, for example, online voter registration systems to provide it. And we've been driving them to have more accessible and reasonable registration systems in general. Another priority is providing safe in-person voting options. While we are seeing record-breaking numbers of voters casting their ballots by mail, and that's a big part of the conversation that I'll talk about more in a moment, the country is still going to need an adequate number of safe polling places for the voters who choose to vote in person. States should expand early voting options that can reduce long lines, reduce crowding, and lower the stress that administrators and election workers feel on election day. There are also some Americans, especially in the Black community, for whom voting in person is a deeply held value and tradition. We need to respect that, and we need to make space for that in advocacy. For voters who need language assistance and voters with physical or visual impairments, in-person voting might be a necessity. And finally, some voters have problems with unreliable mail service, and those problems reach back even before the attacks on the post office that are prevalent now. So again, very important to push for safe and ample in-person voting options. Third, we've worked to get local governments to offer voter education about the election process, and that needs to happen in voters and constituencies' language of preference. So whenever there are changes to polling places, whenever there are discussions about changes to polling places, that needs to be information that's readily available to the public. Let's talk about vote by mail. There have been some instances where election officials have done the right thing even when they don't necessarily deserve all that much credit. One example is for the June primaries in Georgia, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger mailed absentee ballot applications to some 7 million active voters. That's good. That yielded a healthy voter turnout in the primaries in Georgia. Now, as we look ahead to the general, it just so happens that the state of Georgia is being less proactive. They decided to have voters go to a website to request their ballots, which just adds unnecessary steps between voters and their ballots. Unfortunately, Georgia is not alone. We're seeing too many elected leaders from the federal government to the local level use their platforms, their resources to try to get in the way of the voting process and even mislead people about it. Over in Texas, the state is actually in court right now suing Harris County. That's where Houston is located, because the county had the nerve to send out absentee ballot applications to all registered voters. The state of Texas thinks that only voters who are 65 and older should get an application in the mail. So our team is intervening in that lawsuit. Adding to those complications, the active, ongoing effort to discredit our institutions, such as the Postal Service, which are part of a broader effort to instill fear and misdirect the public about our voting process and to set up a narrative intended to help one side of these people in power. But let's not lose perspective here. When it comes to the United States Postal Service, it exists based on the premise that every person in the country has the right to equal access to secure, efficient, and affordable mail service. So it's shameful that it's the Postal Service is being politicized in order to give some elected officials an advantage. But I wanted to touch on what we can do. On one hand, elected leaders, instead of trying to starve the Postal Service and undermine its ability to do its critical job, they need to fund the agency and support its role in helping Americans exercise the right to vote. And yes, we are getting closer to the November election, so time is running a little bit low, but every one of us needs to let our elected representatives know where we stand on this issue. Second, we can help the Postal Service have as much time as possible to deliver mail ballots. Voters who want to cast their ballots by mail can do our part by requesting an absentee or mail ballot as soon as possible, and then we can drop that off once we've voted it in designated locations or mail them well ahead of Election Day. And we should also just tell others, if you're here listening to this panel, it means that you're already involved and people in your social network, in your family, among your friends likely look to you for information. They need to be comfortable with our Postal Service and our democracy, given the lies and efforts to discredit it. So let's go ahead and tell them that yes, we can vote by mail if that's what people want to do, but we need to tell them to have a plan, to be aware of local deadlines, and to request and then send in ballots as soon as possible. So to close, we know that the task ahead for election officials and workers, poll workers, and for us advocates is significant. This is 2020 after all, and our democracy and all its components are strained at best. The good news is that in the spirit of those who have done this work before us, like Congressman John Lewis, risking more than most of us, there's a lot we can do to make this work. So I hope we can go out there and let our friends and neighbors know that we can make a difference if we step in, and that it's up to us to do so. When the stakes are this high and belief in democracy itself is strained, it is up to us to use our voices and platforms to make the case for democracy. So thank you. And with that, I'll hand it back to Professor Douglas Horsford.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for your presentation and helping us to think about a lot of the issues that are going to be facing this election that's coming up in less than 50 days. At this point, I want to invite Julie and Ricardo back on, and we're going to have more of a panel conversation at this point. Thank you again for your remarks. I wanted to just kind of jump into the question that I think many of us might have, and that's what do you anticipate is going to happen between now and November 3rd? What are some of the things that you're seeing on the ground in the work that you do, and what do you kind of anticipate may happen between now and then?
Well, I can try to answer that. I would see from now until November 3rd as two chapters. The first is the few weeks that we have left until the voter registration deadline in many states. And then there's the next 29 or so days leading into the election. As many people have certainly asked me and asked publicly, will we have a result on election day? So when we think about from now until the election, I think we're also talking about until the canvassed results of the election are available. Like I said, we've had over a dozen unexpected cases related to the pandemic. Many things are unexpected at this point, but we didn't think that we would need to litigate on an emergency basis so many issues related to voting by mail and access to voting by mail. We do usually have emergency litigation in the 60 or so days before an election, and that can take the form of voter purges if people are removed from the rolls, of moving polling places or providing insufficient drop boxes for vote by mail ballots, and a host of other issues. And then usually on election day, either for a particular geography or on a particular issue, we see problems crop up. For example, we've seen 5 to 7 hour lines in Georgia and in Florida. We see other election day problems that we try to address in the moment. Then there's, of course, the canvassing of what we expect to be a large number of vote by mail ballots. And that's a bit unprecedented, but whatever, there will be probably some activity in the canvassing period to make sure that the results are accurate and complete as quickly as possible.
Thank you for that encouraging about that process. Ricardo, your thoughts about turning out the vote and some of the maybe suppression tactics that we'll be facing?
Right. I think what Julie said is right on. And as an advocate and as a campaigner, I might take a point of privilege and maybe switch it around a little bit, because I would love to pause in and say, well, what we can do. And between now and the election, we have the opportunity to shape what voting looks like and look under the hood, see what the voting systems look like, what the protocols look like in our counties and in our states. I'm going to share a link, and this is to a set of state-by-state toolkits that we produce at the Brennan Center. It gives you a snapshot broadly on the contours of voting in your state, and you can look at what's been done and what is still left to do. So you can take that and cross-reference it to your county and to your state, the protocols in place right now, and call them. If they are not paying for postage for vote by mail ballots to be returned, maybe call them. Call your Secretary of State's office, call your state legislator, call your county commissioner, and ask them, like, hey, I think this is important and this should happen. Because you'll be surprised. Sometimes what we're seeing is, and we're doing advocacy in different counties in Texas, we're finding that some commissioners just need to hear from people. They're overwhelmed and they're trying to, they're in this mindset, like as if the elections were just like they were 12 years ago, but they're not, and they need to think creatively. And sometimes a nudge, a call, an email from a person can go a long way.
And remind us, who are the people that we should contact? We did receive one question that asked about what types of resources are available to train poll workers, for example, who will assist on November 3rd. So what are the offices that people should contact if they have questions or they're concerned about what's happening at their local polls?
Okay. Well, if you're trying to shape what voting looks like, I would look at Secretary of State, your state representatives, meaning your assembly member and your state senator, and look into your county. Sometimes there can be an elections office in your county, and they hold a lot of power and decision-making when it comes to elections. And if you're looking into poll worker participation, volunteering, training, I would start with the county as well.
Thank you. So the census is actually another kind of piece of this, and Julie, you mentioned that in a case that you worked on recently, and that deadline is coming up soon. And so how does that connect to voting, and does it? Are these larger questions about representation?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of issues surrounding the census in the last year that have been thankfully successfully litigated. The census may not impact this upcoming November election, but I guarantee it will absolutely impact every election for the next 10 years. And that's for the following reason. The census is a count of everybody in the United States required by the Constitution every 10 years. The count of the population determines how resources are allocated, and as it relates to voting, how district lines are drawn. So there's an obligation for state legislators to draw both congressional and state districts, representative districts, with equal populations. What happens if people don't respond to the census? They're not counted and they're not considered for purposes of redistricting. Redistricting, and because of political and racial gerrymandering, can have a detrimental effect for years to come. Obviously, the census has been disrupted to some extent by the pandemic. Many people are dislocated, have moved around, or have other priorities right now, but it's extremely important for folks to respond to the census mailing, to include all of the information on their household, and to make sure that they and their family and their community count in the upcoming census, both for voting purposes and for a number of other services from the federal, state, and local governments.
Indeed, thank you for that reminder. And to our community as well at Teachers College and all of us who work as educators, please make sure to get that message out, because it's really important to how we fund our schools and a lot of the other supports that we have in our communities. And we have until September 30th to do that. We have another question. It's even if we all do our part to vote and help get out the vote, how confident are you that we will have a clean election in which the integrity of the voting process will be ensured?
I can try to answer that. I mean, US elections are very safe and have a high level of integrity. I know we all read about, or there are claims from some politicians about fraud, but I can tell you I've been involved in litigation for more than 10 years. And in states where fraud or potential fraud is used as an excuse to suppress the right to vote, over the course of years of litigation and reviewing tens of thousands of documents, states often only come up with a handful, 41 in one instance, individual instances, not of fraud, but of voter errors. Fraud is, to say the least, not a rampant problem, nor is most of the types of election integrity that the boogeyman that a lot of people talk about. So I think we can have confidence in the integrity of our elections. Election security, it might be something that Ricardo can talk about more. I know that Brennan Center does some work on that. It's something that's constantly being updated and that we need to be vigilant about. But I think we can be confident that that if we cast ballots, they will be counted, and that we can get transparent information on what occurs on election day and an accurate, transparent result.
Thank you, Julie. Ricardo, do you want to speak to election integrity?
Thank you. Yes, I think that's exactly right. What we see with these narratives that are intended to scare people, they play more into this the media cycle piece of this, and but because we see that President Trump is voting by mail, a number of his top level staffers do, so it's a lot of there's a lot of misdirection and strategic calculation done in those allegations. I see that the question also goes into other pieces along the lines of to what extent can various voter suppression tactics and intimidation, postal service delays, or sabotage affect the election. And I think to Julie's point, a lot of this is we know that our systems work, right? There's you don't see you won't see this on 60 Minutes too often, but there's a lot of fail-safe processes and redundance of verifications at all levels in the election involving our ballots. So our elections are highly safe and they're designed to catch any issues that come up. I like to compare it to a bank. Sometimes some people do try to mess with your credit card, but it's often caught, right? You get those alerts in your apps. So a healthy election system is one that is built to catch that, right? We can't stop people from trying things, but a good election system will we'll catch that. For the rest, you know, I understand that there's people are anxious. People are listening to what the let's call them anti-democracy groups are trying to do. And I would say, if you're able to, get involved. Look at who in your community is getting ready to defend the polling places. That could be Common Cause, it could be ACLU, it could be a community group. There's the 866 I Vote Coalition, and they do really terrific work. And if you can, volunteer to be a poll worker, because that's, when you do that, you're giving local elections systems the resources, the people power to spot issues, to keep the lines moving, to keep things in their place. So there's a lot that we can do to make elections work better.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. We also received a question about what is being done to get the word out about the census. And I'll just, I want to mention an organization that's doing some important work there. It's called faircount.org. And if you go there, you can access a lot of really great information regarding the census. And you can still file your census online if you're currently staying somewhere other than your official place of residence. So just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that. And I don't know what happened to Julie. But I wanted to make sure, do we have time for more questions?
Yes, we can, like 5 more minutes.
I wanted to know kind of what, there's a lot of parallels between, you know, the tactics that are being used now and what we're experiencing around voter suppression with what was happening in the 50s and the 60s. What's different about it? What's unique, and what should we be keeping our eyes on going forward?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think that people know how to disguise it more. You don't see the fire hoses or, you know, the police dogs trying to scare people of color, the Black community trying to register to vote in the same way. But we see it, it's almost, you know, it's voter suppression is more strategic. It wears a suit and tie. And it's about what narratives you pump out there in the press to scare people. Like the commenter said in their questions, sometimes they try to get bad information out to voters to mislead them. So this is why it's important that we talk to each other, that we connect with these organizations that are clued into the elections process, because there's so much power that each one of us can do, holds to trying to plug into this broader effort to protect elections and promote the vote.
Okay, we are fielding some questions. If you want to submit a question for our panelists, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. If not, I'm happy to continue asking questions. I think one that's certainly on our mind, and you mentioned this in your presentation, Ricardo, was what all of this means in the COVID moment. And how does that, you know, continue to throw yet some more complication to it? And what are things that we can do to help ensure that that crisis doesn't create another crisis going into the election?
That's right, that's right. So we saw this play out in the primaries in earlier months, right? And as I mentioned earlier, this is what led to problems in Georgia with long lines. In a couple of states, they have not invested as much as they should in a proper structure and process for vote by mail. So going into November, we want to see more investment in any of those processes. There's so much that we can do to promote a more robust and steady process for vote by mail, which is obviously so important in this election amid a pandemic. In that toolkit that I shared, it can tell you, for example, if everything from whether ballot applications are being sent out, whether you get a ballot in the mail, whether there's a website existing where people can do that. All those things, they might not sound so flashy, but it adds up to the ease and smoothness with which a voter who is preoccupied We're all doing we're all in the middle of a pandemic. People are balancing work with school with children, and the last thing you need is more hurdles that make it harder for you to vote. So if you can volunteer, if you can make those calls to local officials, please do, because it really does make a difference, and that's what we need most of right now.
Thank you. And that really transitions us into the last question that I wanted to ask of both of you. I think even since the last election, a big question that people have is, what can I do? You know, what is the one thing that I can do? And we certainly can complete the census form and we can vote, but what is one other thing that you would like people to leave tonight's event focused on doing some direct action? What do you recommend?
I would say in the first instance for everybody to check their registration and make a voting plan. And when I say make a voting plan, you know, most of what we do in our day-to-day lives is scheduled or planned. People say, I'm going to vote, but they don't decide on how they're going to do that. So if you're going to vote by absentee, make that choice and request an absentee ballot. If you plan to vote in person, whether you're in a state that offers early voting or you plan to vote on election day, make sure you know where your polling place is and schedule on the day that you plan to go vote the time to actually be able to cast your ballot. So make sure your registration is updated and accurate and make a plan to vote. I think the other two things people can do is spread the word about voting. Make sure other people get registered and have their own voting plan. And if folks have the time and the resources to do it, then certainly learning how to be a poll worker, volunteering as a poll worker, working as a poll worker is a wonderful way to have a positive impact on the election. There's a shortage of poll workers in a lot of states right now. Oftentimes older people volunteer for those positions, and the pandemic has made it exceedingly dangerous for some people to have any additional contact by being at the polls. So I would encourage folks to consider that as one option, or to volunteer to do election protection work.
Excellent. We have clear marching orders on what we need to do, right? Make sure you check your registration, have a voting plan, spread the word. Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add to what we've shared already, if you can volunteer to be a poll worker. I was just looking at some resources online, so there's plenty of opportunities to do that. And yeah, whatever you feel like is most your lane, but you should be doing something. I'm going to ask that you do that. Share reliable voter registration information, deadlines information with your network. Become a poll worker if you can, and make sure you have your voting plan, like Julie said.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us on Constitution Day. This information is so incredibly important and urgent, and we just thank you for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and the good trouble that you engage in to ensure that our rights are protected. So thank you both very much. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Professor Horsford, and thank you to our esteemed colleagues, Julie Ebenstein and Ricardo Ramirez, not only for your enlightening presentation, but for your day-to-day work and your unwavering commitment to democracy in our country. My name is Juan Carlos Reyes. I am the Director for Diversity and Community Affairs and Equity in our office. As a team, we pride ourselves on engaging in collaborative efforts with the TC community. We truly believe that our work is most successful when the mission is embedded in the fabric of the institution. To that end, we are thankful for our college-wide support to put this program together and educate our community about the voting process. Please look out for information from the Office of Government Relationships and the wider TC Votes initiatives, which was mentioned earlier. We are also looking forward to continuing our Democracy and Education series this academic year. You will get additional emails from me and from Janice about that soon. Please look out for our emails and don't delete them. I know often we get a lot of emails, but that's our best way to communicate with you. We want to also thank our community of colleagues beyond TC. This is our second program in the last 2 years working with the ACLU and the Brennan Center. I just want to yet again thank you for your continued support and partnership and for always bringing your voices to TC. As Janice said, and as Congressman Lewis so eloquently stated in his final op-ed, there are a lot of lessons to learn from our history. We will continue to look back on those lessons and honor the giants that came before us. Congressman John Lewis will remain in our thoughts always, but more importantly, he remains an inspiration as we continue to move forward together. Lastly, last but not least, I just want to take a quick moment to thank our entire ODCA team, Melissa Rooker, Kathy Santana, and of course, our Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs, Janice Robinson. I am grateful to be part of a team that genuinely honors this work. With that, I just want to turn it over to my colleague, Kathy Santana, who has some final closing thoughts as you go and close the program.
I'm Kathy Santana, and I'm the Administrative Manager in the Office of the Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs. And I just want to thank everyone for participating in this event where we had the opportunity to explore the history of our country's right to vote and current challenges in election protection. The Office of the Vice President for Diversity and Community Affairs is especially grateful to be able to create a space for these types of conversations. There were many people involved in bringing this event together, so I just want to take a quick moment to thank them. John Park, Academic Technology Specialist, Rudy Kaba, Event Technology Specialist, and the TCIT team. We could not have pulled off this program without you or without your guidance, so thank you so much. Matthew Kemp, Director of Government Relations. Matt was a key collaborative partner in this process, and he has prepared an extensive resource page with information about the TC Votes Initiative. So we hope you guys will take a look at that. We will share this information with you via email. And some other people, colleagues who worked with us on this event, the Office of College Events, James Gardner, Associate Vice President for External Affairs and his team, Matthew Vincent, Director of Digital Communications, and last but not least, you all, our TC community. Thank you for your support and your engagement this evening. We really hope that you enjoyed the program and found it informative. We are looking forward to an engaging semester with you, so please look out for emails from ODCA. Specifically, we're going to be sending a takeaway follow-up email to this conversation with resources, events, and links for you guys to kind of continue the conversation and continue getting involved in election protection. Thank you so much.